tell you something that Donald Trump did, which none of us understood at that time, but he did, and you have to give him credit for this. He has phenomenal political instincts. Let me say it to you this way. There was a man that lived on Fifth Avenue in a triplex apartment that looked like Louis XIV smoked crystal meth and decorated the apartment. He saw the problems in the neighborhood I grew up in, and I missed it.
Anthony Scaramucci, businessman, podcaster, former communications director for Donald Trump. You owe your media and podcasting career to him after those 10 days.
That was the most brutal experience of my life. I had a crisis PR person. He told me, look, you probably should go dark for 5 years. But, in life, when you make mistakes and you're an entrepreneur and you take risks like that, you got to face the music. And I did that.
From Bloomberg Weekend, this is the Mishal Husain Show. I first heard the name Anthony Scaramucci at the same time I suspect you probably did. July 2017, when he was named communications director for Donald Trump, a few months into his first presidential term. He was clearly going to be a key figure in this White House, I thought, already known by his nickname, the Mooch, confident, showy, ready to do battle for the MAGA agenda. Only 10 days later, he was fired. That's part of what we talk about in this conversation, how bruising it was, humiliating even. Today, Anthony Scaramucci is well known as a podcaster. He has his own show, Open Book, and co-hosts The Rest is Politics US, while also running his own investment firm and being evangelical about crypto. He's a big talker, and by big, I mean expansive. He talks a lot. Here, we get to find out where that drive comes from, the Long Island community of his childhood. Although he also admits that he forgot that world for many years after discovering Wall Street. We spoke in London. He was visiting. I was just back from Washington and my White House Correspondents' Dinner experience. And I wanted to start with US politics because we're now less than 6 months away from the midterms. So I wondered, what does the Mooch think will happen?
Listen, November's still a long time off, so it's very hard to make these predictions. If you look at Calci or the poly markets, it looks like the Democrats will win the House. But the big problem in American politics right now is the gerrymandering. And so for viewers outside the United States, the political leaders have the opportunity to redistrict or to cut the congressional districts in a way that could favor their party. And so even though Donald Trump and the Republicans started this redistricting fight, Democrats seem to be ahead. But I just want you to think about this. We have 435 congressional districts. Approximately 8% of those, 35 to 40 at max, are up for contest. So they've done such a powerful job of redistricting that they've taken out of the equation a Democrat beating a Republican in a Republican district or a Republican beating a Democrat in a Democratic district. And so think about this. We only have 35 purple districts now. And so I think that's unfair to the American people. And I would just say this rhetorically, are we in a real democracy where the politicians are picking the voters? I thought the voters were supposed to pick the politicians. So we're in sore need of reform.
And yet there is this possibility, isn't it? It's not out of the question that the Democrats end up taking the Senate as well as the House, or are you really cautious on that?
I'm a little more cautious on that because the red states that have less population in them, you could hear the flurry, you can hear some purpling, and then they always go back to red. So
the Republican states.
Tallarico is going to be running against
He's a Democrat.
He's a Democrat in Texas, and I believe Texas will stay red. So I'm a little more cautious about that. If you're telling me James Tallarico is going to turn the state of Texas purple, where there'll be one Republican and one Democrat from the state, that'll be a watershed activity in American politics. So I'm a little more cautious about it. These machines, they have created a cartel. They have a duopoly now.
The two parties,
The two parties, yeah. And so they sort of control the landscape. They've tightened up their ability to get incumbents reelected. The Congress has a 14 or 15% approval rating. So it's like slightly above Kim Il-jung, the North Korean dictator. However, you have a 95% reincumbency rate. So just imagine you and I open up a restaurant and our food is terrible. We're getting like 1-star Yelp ratings, but we can never get the restaurant closed, and we always stay as the two chefs in the restaurant. And so that's what's going on in Washington right now. And so, I think the Democrats will win. If you're
the
just
House of Representatives.
I think the Republicans will probably keep the Senate. That's my best guess.
You're still a registered Republican, right?
I am. I mean, so what is your British football team? Are you like an Arsenal fan? Or are you Manchester United? Or
now you're really cutting to the chase. I live in North London, so if I'm anything, I'm probably an Arsenal fan.
Okay, so for Arsenal fans out there, I don't know how the team does, but I'm a New York Met fan, and we're just having a horrific time. But you don't leave. I'm a New York Jet fan. We haven't won the Super Bowl since 1969. So the Republican Party, in my mind, is in the doldrums. We have a huge losing streak going on intellectually. Donald Trump hijacked that party. He decapitated what was once known as the Republican Party, and he did sort of this M&A transaction where he installed this right-wing populist party. It's called the Republican Party, but it's really the MAGA party, and it's the personality cult of Donald Trump. And so I'm of the belief when his political personality extinguishes sometime in 2028, there'll be an ideological battle for that party again in terms of who will be running that party. So,
but I'm wondering why you're not
I'm a loyalist.
Yeah, but I'm wondering why you're not more active in the zone of trying to find that next Republican. Because what I see you doing is not just, I know you voted for Biden and then Harris, right, in the last two presidential elections?
I just think Trump is too dangerous. I think obviously it's funny because I'm sure
and you have history with him, which we'll get into.
Wall Street at some point. All my Wall Street buddies voted for him, and now they're all regretting the fact that they voted for him. So it's just one of those things.
Are they all regretting that they voted for him? I mean, a lot of them have doing well out of the markets.
I think most people are regretting it. Yeah, I'm of the belief that prices are higher. We have an oil crisis going on right now. He imposed illegal tariffs, which raised the pricing umbrella for all the lower middle income people that voted for him. You're in a quagmire of a war. It's going to be very difficult to disengage the United States from that war. You've weakened our relationships with our European allies, our Gulf allies. He's put us in a very vulnerable state as a country and an economy. If you want to make the case that the banks have record profits in the short term, sure. But he's also suing some of the banking executives. This is a very difficult time in the country where you are losing the predictive capability of our justice system. You're losing the predictive capability of what our civil rights are and what our free speech rights are in the country. For those reasons, it's very, very bad for business. So, yeah, I think a lot of people are regretting it.
But that's also why I'm asking you that given you're still a Republican, why are you not more actively searching for the Republican that you would like to succeed Donald Trump? Because these are the last 2 years of his presidency.
Well, I think it's early. We have to get through the midterms. We have to really look at the landscape of who's going to be running. Is Glenn Youngkin running? And will he have the umbrella? One of the biggest things that you need, if not the most important thing that you need to be the president of the United States, is name recognition. And so just remember the type of electorate that you're dealing with. The people that are listening to your show or watching your show, they're very sophisticated. They're very up to speed in the world of American politics. But the average voter is really not. They make that decision in the week prior to the presidential election.
And Donald Trump had that name recognition because of television.
Not only that, he was the most famous guy in 2016, but by 2024, he was the most famous person on the planet. I would stipulate that. I mean, you may say there was a rock star here or there that has more followers on social media, but he was a very well-recognized name. And so you have to see who emerges. Also, I think the war is going to hurt the people that are close to Donald Trump. I think Rubio, and I've said this on our podcast, I think Rubio and Vance are going to be victimized by Trump in ways they haven't totally predicted yet. He's already started with Vance with the attack on the Pope and, hitting Vance because he knows Vance has got a book coming out on his convergence or his conversion into Catholicism.
He doesn't want to build J.D. Vance up into the next president and his successor.
Of course not. This is
Why not?
His personality is, you guys were nothing before I got on this stage. And I've carried you for the last 12 years. And the 2020 election was rigged, and everyone knows it. And I should have won that election as well. And I've returned to the presidency carrying all the Republicans on my back. You were nobodies before I got here. You'll be nobodies after I leave. That's Donald Trump's personality. And to not understand that is to not understand Donald Trump. And let me give two quick examples. Cornyn. He is 35 years in the Senate from the state of Texas. 99% of the time he voted with Donald Trump. 1% of the time he didn't. Trump dusted him. Crenshaw, House of Representatives, Army vet, lost his eye in combat. 99% of the time he voted with Donald Trump. 1% of the time he didn't. Trump endorsed the other candidate. He lost the primary to return to the House of Representatives. You have to understand the nature of Donald Trump. And what's still going on is we try to normalize him and sane wash him and put him into a bucket. Oh, he's a Republican. He'll want a Republican to succeed him, or he'll want J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio. He doesn't want those guys to succeed him. Let's say he has a successful remaining 2 years of his presidency, which seems unlikely, but let's say he did. He wouldn't want those guys taking any credit for anything that happened in the administration. It's an administration of one person, and there's one spotlight on. You
met him years ago, didn't you? I think, is it way back even in the 90s in New York?
Well, he would not have remembered that. I was a young man working at Goldman Sachs. My boss took me to see him. This was during some real struggles for him during the casino restructuring and some of the bankruptcies, and he was looking for financing. And, I looked up to him. I'm not somebody that like whitewashes or tries to recolor history. I read The Art of the Deal. I think I was a law school student when it came out. Trump was from Queens. I was from either further out. And so we looked up to Donald Trump. The rappers sang songs about Donald Trump. We admired his bravado and his risk-taking and his image-making. And so at age 31, when I met him for the first time, it was a very impressionable meeting for me. I'm sure he had no recollection of the meeting. But years later, I was working at CNBC as a one of those paid contributors. And then I got invited to the Apprentice parties, and I got invited to the Apprentice finale, and we did a couple of fundraising events together, including Robin Hood. And then we started to develop a relationship. And then very famously in 2012, I was co-finance chair for Mitt Romney for New York. And so we did two political fundraisers in Donald Trump's triplex apartment for Governor Romney. And by the way, Donald Trump did a really good job raising money
for Mitt Romney.
Governor Romney.
It seems extraordinary now to think of that.
I'll tell you something that Donald Trump did, which none of us understood at that time, but he did, and you have to give him credit for this. He has phenomenal political instincts. Mitt was in trouble. He had lost in South Carolina to Newt Gingrich, and he was now coming into the Super Tuesday primaries. It was a big opportunity for Mitt. And Trump offered to do what are called robocalls for him in parts of rural and blue-collar Michigan. And we looked at that and said, well, why the hell would we need that? And Trump said, no, trust me, you need it. And he made these robocalls. And so if you were home and the phone rang, it would say, hey, I'm Donald Trump. It was on a recorded message. I want you to vote for Mitt Romney. It had an unbelievable impact on that primary. And it was the first, for me, it was the first origin story of understanding the populist movement that was happening in the United States. And at that time, we'll call him Mr. Trump because he wasn't president yet, Mr. Trump's understanding of it and his hold on it. And so that's when we actually became close. That's when we started to develop a relationship and then talk to each other and see each other at restaurants and so forth.
So that period between 2012 and 2017, when he brought you into the White House as his communications director, by then you were a true believer, wouldn't you? You were Team MAGA. Or was that a front at that point?
No, I think it's something I have to own for the rest of my life. I'm a very honest person. I wasn't Team MAGA. I had worked for Governor Walker from Wisconsin. When Scott dropped out of the race, I went to work for Jeb Bush. And so I'll just set the scene for you. In March of 2015, Donald Trump called me. I went to his office, had breakfast with him. I always tease him about this. His desk is up here, Mishal. Your chair is down there. So you're you're looking up at him. Okay, that's how he had the office set up. And I'm looking up at him and he's saying, I'm running for president. I just finished my time with The Apprentice. And I looked at him like he was crazy. I said, you're not running for president. I said, that's just like a publicity stunt. He said, oh, no, you think that. Everybody thinks that. That's why I'm so low in the polls. But when I announce that I'm running, I'm going to go right to the top of the polls. And I laughed and said, yeah, that's not going to happen. And he said, no, I've got Corey Lewandowski downstairs. He's running my campaign. Why don't you go meet with him? And I said, listen, Mr. Trump, I'm working for Jeb. And he said, don't you think he has low energy? And I said, no, I don't think he has low energy. And he says, okay, I'll tell you what. I get the loyalty. You're a longtime Republican. When Jeb comes out of the race, will you come work for me? And right then and there, I reached over, I shook his hand. I said, yes, I will come work for you. And Jeb got knocked out of the race in South Carolina. Mr. Trump called me. I had a little presentation for him how I could help him find those Romney donors. And then we did our first event in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then that's when I got the MAGA fever. And so what was MAGA fever for me? Donald Trump was talking to my dad. My dad was born in 1935. He was born in a coal mining town in northeastern Pennsylvania. He wasn't college educated. He went on to become a crane operator on Long Island, spent 41 years in the union. But he had a high-paying job. We had a tiny little house on Long Island, and we lived a good part of the American dream. And I would never dishonor my dad by telling you we grew up poor. We did not grow up poor. But what I mean by he was talking to my dad, these were guys that, like my dad, instead of being born in 1935, they were born in 65 or 75. And I was talking to these people in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and they were letting me know that once economically aspirational blue-collar family, the one I grew up in, doesn't exist in America anymore. These families went from economically aspirational to economically desperational. And one young man said something to me that I will never forget. He said, you think you're in New Mexico. He said, yeah, but that's not New Mexico. That would be Mexico, because that's where our factory moved. My dad worked there for 30 years. I was there for 12. The factory moved, and we blighted these towns. We blighted these cities. And I thought, and I got it wrong, of course, but I thought, okay, I'm going to work for Donald Trump. He sees something about America that we need to fix. We need to reconnect these people who are angry. And perhaps you have those people that are leaning on people like Nigel Farage here in this country. But I said, we're going to reconnect those people. So yes, I bought in. I spent 71 days on the campaign trail with him, did 71 stops. I did countless hours of media advocacy for him and a tremendous amount of fundraising, so much so that when he won, he named me to his executive transition team.
The thing that surprises me is that because of your background, because of seeing how hard your father worked and the community around you, had you really never thought along these lines before you saw Donald Trump and voters respond to him in that way?
So
you lived the American dream, right, yourself, because you got rich compared to your father's.
So this is a very important point. And this is something, again, it doesn't reflect well on me, but it's important for me to share it with you. That neighborhood that I was in Port Washington, there were sheetrock installers and plumbers and crane operators and landscapers. But I left that neighborhood. I went to Tufts University and Harvard Law School.
And Wall Street.
And 7 years at Goldman Sachs. And then I built my own hedge fund business. And then I got invited to the World Economic Forum to speak. And I created a whole activity thing there. And I started hanging out in the salons of the wealthy. My point is, when you hang out with a certain group of people, you pick up the collective biases of those people.
Or you forget where you came from.
And you forget where you came from. And I'll tell you another quick story, which is also relevant to his instincts versus mine. I'm on the plane, we're flying somewhere else, and I'm reading something that was prepared by Skybridge's economic team.
Skybridge is your firm. Mm-hmm.
What are you reading? Oh, I'm reading about the Brexit. He goes, oh, you're an idiot. I said, I'm an idiot. I said, I know I'm an idiot, but why am I an idiot? He goes, I'll tell you what's in that report. That report is saying that it's economically wrong and economically irrational for the British citizens, the UK citizens, to Brexit. Isn't that what it says? I says, yes, it is. And I have all the backup data here. He goes, yeah, that's ridiculous. They're going to Brexit. I was like, why are you saying that? He says, haven't you been traveling around with me to all of these cities? You don't think that they have those cities and those towns in the UK? Okay. And that was late May of 2016. By the end of June, this country had Brexited, and he got that. I didn't get it. And so, let me say it to you this way. There was a man that lived adjacent to the Tiffany store on Fifth Avenue in a triplex apartment that looked like Louis XIV smoked crystal meth and decorated the apartment. He saw the problems in the neighborhood I grew up in, and I missed it.
So I think then you would credit him with these two things, perhaps. One is that he showed you something that you otherwise hadn't seen because of your professional experience and your new world. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is you owe your media and podcasting career to him after those 10 days that you were in the White House actually the way he fired you.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, so I think that's a little bit of a silver lining, I guess, in some ways. But the truth of the matter is that was the most brutal experience of my life. We can talk about it and we can revise it. It's 9 years later. Because, that worked out great for me. I have this nice podcast business, and you and I are hanging out in this beautiful studio and talking on your wonderful show. So that worked out great for me. But let me set the scene for you and your viewers and listeners. I am fighting with him in the White House, as predicted by my wife, that our personalities would not gel in a situation like that. Remember in the campaign where I was a volunteer of his, we were two New Yorkers and two entrepreneurs taking risks in a campaign. And it used to bother people that I could have this sort of bilateral, direct conversation with him because there was a lot of sycophants around him. But he wanted sycophants in the White House. And so there I was with him. And on that Friday, he called me a deep stater. And I was like, well, I'm not a deep stater. I mean, I think I went to Washington one time on a field trip. I'm definitely not a deep stater. But I didn't want to do things the way he wanted to do them. Okay, I had actually taken constitutional law in law school, and I had a thought process about it being the institution of the presidency, and you're a caretaker of it. I'm not necessarily working for you as much as I'm working for the American people and want to abide to the Constitution. Well, 11 days later, I got fired. And I blame myself for the firing and all that other stuff. I never blame anybody, him or anybody else. But it's important to tell this part of the story because that was brutal. My wife and I were fighting. She had filed for divorce on me. I missed the birth of my son, Mishal. He was born on July 24, 2017. I was at the Boy Scouts event with Donald Trump in West Virginia.
You couldn't leave the event for the birth of your child?
There was no way out of the event. She went into premature labor. And he landed the plane. We drove 35 miles away from the plane into a campground. And even if I got back to the plane, there was a 60-mile no-fly zone. There was just no way back. Okay, so I had a series of colossal disasters happen to me sequentially. I can feel the perspiration as I'm speaking about it. But I was in a potential divorce, missed the birth of my son, got fired from the White House after 11 days, and I got torched by everybody. I mean, I had a crisis PR person that told me to buy a villa in, God bless the guy. He told me, look, go buy a villa in Tuscany and come back to the United States in 2022. You're never going to be able to rebuild your career or your media reputation, and you probably should go dark for 5 years. But in life, when you make mistakes and you're an entrepreneur and you take risks like that, you got to face the music. And I did that. So yes, I do have a podcast business and I do have things like that, but I paid the price for those things.
Yeah, it was very public and I can see that there was a really humiliating aspect to it.
I am so glad that you brought up the word humiliating because I thought you were going to be a little bit too British and not bring up that word. But it was humiliating. I like the way you say it better. You have a nicer accent than me, but it was humiliating.
But wasn't it Donald Trump who also once told you there's essentially that bad publicity is still publicity and that negative press stories still have their value because you've got your own business now.
You've done your homework. He did say, he has said that. He's repeatedly said that.
I mean, does it help you be the front man and get attraction for your firm, and
I think it hurts.
to be more in the your name is really well known?
I think it hurts and helps. My 34-year-old son, who went to Stanford Business School, says to me, "Dad, you're killing me. You're killing my networking opportunities." I said, "Why?" He goes, "Well, the Republicans hate you because you were once with Trump and you left Trump." He goes, "The Democrats, forget it. They hate you because you were once with Trump." He goes, "You've got me in like networking purgatory." So it helps and it hurts. It's a little bit of both. You're going to get some people and you're going to lose some people, and that's life. I'm not worried about that aspect of it.
Is the other really hard moment that you've had, which is possibly comparable, over your association with Sam Bankman-Fried, who's now been sentenced over his defrauding of investors and customers in his cryptocurrency business? Because you believed in him. You were business partners. You were close to him.
I liked Sam, yeah.
And then there was a massive fallout on you and your firm from his downfall. Yeah,
I mean, and there were some nasty articles written on Bloomberg, frankly. And by the way, I'm a free speech absolutist, and so those reporters had the right to write those articles, and then they're allowed to write whatever they want to write. If you're a public figure, you have to be a big person, and you have to accept the criticism and the potential praise of what's going on. But the one problem when you're a high-profile person, however, your failures go around the world in 5 seconds, okay, before you can tie your shoelaces, okay? Your successes are generally understated, and that's fine, but those are two, to me, colossal failures in my career. Missizing, not understanding Trump appropriately, I've well explained that, and I'm happy to continue to explain it. Sam Bankman-Fried is a different story. Sam had 25 investors that had given him approximately $1 billion to fund FTX. And these were sovereign, I'm not going to name them because they always get mad at me when I actually name the names, but these were sovereign wealth funds, venture capitalists, billionaire investors, billionaire family offices. And I had a rapport with Sam, and I had a rapport with Sam's mom and dad, who were Stanford Law School professors who knew some of the faculty at Harvard Law School that taught me. And so I felt I had a karetsu, or a connection, into the family. And while Sam was somewhat odd, I thought he was brilliant. And I'm going to say something that makes me look bad. I thought he was ethical. A little odd, but ethical. And I thought his father, who was a tax attorney, and his mother, who taught ethics at Stanford Law School, I made false assumptions. And so, but remember, he gave me the money. I didn't give him the money.
He bought a stake in your firm.
Yeah, he did. He came to our conference. He liked our business. He liked our crypto exposure.
Yeah. You talked about him as the next J.P. Morgan, or the J.P. Morgan of the modern age. I think I said that to
Bloomberg. I thought because he was bailing out at the time. If you remember what happened in the crisis of 1907, John Pierpont Morgan, before the establishment of the Federal Reserve, stepped in and cleared a lot of credit that was potentially defaulting in the panic of 1907. And so we were having that sort of crisis in 2022, and Sam had positioned himself that way. So yes, I did say that. The great irony now in Sam's investment portfolio, he filed for bankruptcy. It was a $17 billion company when the company collapsed. His investment portfolio, his balance sheet today, is worth $114 billion, meaning if they had just kept the balance sheet together. But the reason why he didn't get a retrial is that he broke the law. He moved customer accounts from one place into another place, his own account, which was wholly and totally inappropriate. But again, imagine the situation for me. I'm making an announcement that Sam's buying a piece of my business in September, and I'm talking about this strategic collaboration. 8 weeks later, I've got to go down to the Bahamas and visit with him and his father and realize that he's committed fraud. And I've got to go face the music again. So I have to go back on television and say, yeah, I think this guy, he's entitled to a trial and he's innocent until proven guilty in the court of law. But I think he's done some really bad things here. I think he's a bad actor. That's a painful thing to do.
The thing that surprises me is that after the shock of that moment, and it's a business shock and it's a personal shock because you thought you knew the man, you still today have a high percentage of your personal wealth and your business wrapped up in digital assets, including particularly Bitcoin. And there has been this significant tumble from the tail end of last year to February in the value of that. Mm-hmm. So do you not think that you
Bitcoin
are too...
or you don't like Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, I'm not an expert, but I find it interesting that you
Bitcoin?
are... I don't. Well, this is... you've written a whole book on it, but you obviously own a lot of Bitcoin. And is there any point where you thought too much of my personal wealth is tied up in this?
You'll have to invite me back in 5 years. I'll have to make a determination if I'm right or wrong. But I made a decision in October, November of 2020 that we were going to flip a portion of our assets into digital assets. A big piece of it was going to be in Bitcoin. We were buying those coins at 15, 16, 17,000. They went to 69,000 by November of 2021. We looked like geniuses. And then they collapsed with the FTX crisis and went back to 15,000. So depending on the point that you're in, you either look like a genius or a dummy. But I mean, I bought these coins at 16,000. They're trading at about $78,000 today. And you could say to me, well, they were once trading at 126, so you're a dummy once again. But again, I don't want to judge it that way. I want to judge it over a 5 or 10 year period of time. I think this is a transformative technology. So yeah, I own it. And Sam didn't dissuade me, even though he caused, alongside of a huge deleveraging in the market, he caused a crash in Bitcoin. Bitcoin rallied back. I think the United States will get the legislation and the regulation right. And I think Bitcoin will be part of our long-term asset allocation structure in the United States.
So to you, it's not a risk, it's the future. And it's a future that you're invested in.
I think it's the future. I think you have to take the time to understand it. People that are my age, I'm 62. If you're my age or older, you either don't have the patience for it or you think it's a cryptograph that's absolutely worthless. I was on the Bill Maher show with my old boss, Lloyd Blankfein, who'd be a great guest on your show, by the way. And he had just written a new book, and Bill Maher and Lloyd Blankfein, combined age of like 160, hate Bitcoin, and they're sitting there laying into me over Bitcoin. And I said the same thing to them that I'll say to you. Do the homework. When you're done doing the homework, let's then have the real conversation. So, who's doing the homework? The 30-year-olds, the 40-year-olds. And you know where they're going to be in 10 years? They're going to be in positions of power in the asset management business. And so let's see if I'm right.
Can I take you right back to the way you grew up, though? Because I was really struck reading your book, not the Bitcoin book, the From Wall Street to the White House and Back, where you write about coming home in 1974 and hearing your parents argue about money and then starting a paper round. And you're only 10 years
11.
old.
I was 11.
10, 11 years
11
old.
years old, yeah.
And essentially how hard you worked, how you persuaded houses that they could do with an extra paper a week, not just the one paper a week they were getting.
It was an easy route because these were all like blue-collar row houses and
near your own
blue-collar apartments. Yeah, it was easy to go up and down the steps and knock on the doors and guilt all of these women.
But tell me, what was driving you at that time? Was it a vulnerability, seeing your parents vulnerable, or was it a real desire to lead a different life from your parents?
Well, I think it was both. I started my paper out in February of 1975. I had it until the end of 1977, and I created in that area one of the larger residential paper routes, because what I did was I went to my boss, Mr. Fusco, who's passed, unfortunately, was an awesome guy, and I said, I need 30 free papers every Wednesday. And he's like, what do you need them for? I said, I'm going to go up and down these apartments. I'm going to ring doorbells, and I'm going to ask, the Mrs. Sheridans and the Mrs. McGillicuddy's and the Mrs. Ampoli's to subscribe to Newsday. And so I used to drop off a free paper, and the next day I'd ring the doorbell. I said, did you enjoy the paper? And I had everybody's name, and I had like a check mark of who I collected from. I used to collect on Fridays. And Mrs. Sheridan from Sheridan Electric was the best tipper. And I will always remember her fondly. It was $1.40, to have a daily and Sunday. in 1976. And when I used to ring the doorbell on a Friday, she'd give me a $5 bill. And I was the happiest camper. And which is another reason why I always try to tip everybody really well when I'm in a restaurant or
because you remember what it's like to be,
of course,
where it makes all the difference.
And I gave the money to my mother. You know, I mean, it was probably making $50, $60 a week, kept 15 for myself, and gave it to my mom and dad.
There's another part of your book which was really sad to read, which is you're widely known as the Mooch. But
Right.
tell me about how you first got that nickname. Who first called you that?
Why is that sad to read?
It's sad to read because there's racism in it. That you write in the book that it's one of your teachers in school who doesn't like the ethnic sounding names. He doesn't like the Italians. He doesn't like the Irish.
He didn't like the Polish either. I mean, he decided that if you had a 4-syllable last name, that was like a little bit too long for him. And so he took one of the syllables of your name, and that's what he called you by. And, but, listen, that's life.
But you didn't like it at the time, did you? You
at the time, I didn't know, but I was 9 years old.
You then own it and use it, and credit to you for doing that.
I was 9 years old, so it wasn't like, did I like it or did I dislike it? It was a different era of life. I just bring up the point that, like, when people were like, when I came on the stage at the White House press room and I gave the press conference, oh, he's the Mooch, and they were saying it derisively. I'm like, dude, I've been called the Mooch since 1972. It's not bothering me. You got to find something else to bother me because that one is not going to bother me. So, but he gave me that name. There were worse names than that one. Trust me, that he was giving out to people. But here's the thing. I mean, you can't be a baby and you can't play a victim in life. Okay, you're going to go work for Donald Trump. You're going to go work in presidential politics and you get blown out like that. You can't be a baby. It's like me being an American football player and playing in the NFL and saying that, okay, I'm upset now that I got a concussion. Well, guess what? Everybody gets a concussion. So, I mean, that was life in the 1970s on Long Island. I'm not complaining about it. I'm just explaining what happened.
And the kinds of people who you grew up with, communities which are still like that today, into which MAGA very successfully reached. What do you think is going to happen in the next election? Because we've already talked about the midterms, but let's look at the next election. Do you think the Democrats can win them back?
They don't have the right leadership right now to win them back. I mean, the best thing that the Republicans have going for them are the Democrats. I mean,
you don't see a single potential credible nominee?
Remember, the reaction formation to that story in my book is to make sure that there's a female candidate to be president, or to make sure, or Vice President Harris, who I voted for, and I helped her on her campaign debate prep. She writes in her book, 107 Days, she didn't pick Pete Buttigieg because he was gay. She wrote it. We got to stop doing all of that. In other words, we have to stop overcorrecting for the racism. And then we have to stop doing the identity, gender, sexual orientation.
The best communicator?
Best athletes, best communicators, policymakers, who can build a consensus, who can delegate. There's 5,000 people in the executive branch. We've got our decision-making down to a decision maker of one now. There's one person at the State Department, that's Donald Trump. There's one person at the White House, Donald Trump. There's one person at the Pentagon, Donald Trump. So we have to get back on the playing field with something way more American and way more pluralistic. And the way to do that is put the best athletes in the game and stop trying to overcorrect and try to whitewash what happened in the past. I mean, the statues are the statues. Leave them alone. That's part of our history. Let's go forward with the right ideas for the vision. But I'm optimistic.
Every Democrat would say that that's exactly what they're going to do. And
they haven't done that. They haven't done that.
Well, I guess maybe they say it's early, you say for the Republicans.
This is a circle, and they're in a circular firing squad. They treat Newsom like he's further to the right than Orban. If you're in AOC or Zoran Mondani's camp, Newsom is Viktor Orban. I mean, you got to really look at it for what it is. Cut it out, guys. Focus on the principle. Stop attacking each other, and line up. You know what the Republicans do a way better job of the Democrats? They line up, Michelle. Okay, Ted Cruz wanted to strangle Donald Trump. He lined up with him. Okay, and they all line up together. You got to learn to do that in politics. But
I think you don't really like that about all of those who've lined up under Donald Trump.
I don't like it because they're hurting the country. I don't like it because they're subverting the Constitution. If you told me that Donald Trump was a transformational, healing, regenerative leader who was seeking an American renewal and that was going to help reform America and make it better, then of course I like it. You got to give up something at the table for the other side. That was the nature and the existence of what the founders wanted. It wasn't let me beat you into submission and let me own you culturally in the culture war. That wasn't the goal of the whole thing.
But I think you're saying—
I am optimistic, by the way.
On the Democrats finding someone who can challenge the next—
I don't know who it's going to be, but I will predict on your show that you will see a very surprising American renewal because it's a very, very young country. It doesn't have an anchored culture. It's an experiment, multi-ethnic experiment. And what happens in the country is when we lose our generational memory once every 80 years, we get hit very hard.
But the renewal on the left or the right?
I'm not sure yet. We'll have to see. It could be a Republican. You know, you could invite me back. I'll say, hey, there's a young Republican that is helping people understand where the country has to go, where there's a young Democrat. You know, Buttigieg, as an example, to me, is a very formidable, incredibly talented politician. He's also served in the American military. He's an articulate man. He understands policy, okay, but he is gay, okay, and he can't get the African American community at this moment to vote for him. But maybe they will. Maybe there'll be a transformation. But he's somebody that I would look at and say, okay, that guy has the right timber and he has the right ingredients to be a really good president. So, but I'm telling you that we go through it. 80 years after the Revolutionary War, we had the Civil War. 80 years after that, we had the Great Depression. And that led to the Second World War. We're now 80 years out from that war, and this country is getting dunked because we've lost our generational memory about the institutions and the processes that matter. And so now we need a leader come in and explain that to the people and say we have to return to the process. Okay, and Trump is helping us do that, by the way, because he's so out there doing the opposite that people instinctively know that this is not right. This is why these elections are not going his way. This is why the approval ratings are way down. I think he's got a 35% approval rating. He's helping us. Trump is forcing. You know how Trump made me famous and allowed me to have a podcast? He's actually forcing the American people to have a moral and cultural reckoning with itself. And every time we've done that, we've sought redemption and renewal, and I predict that that will happen.
Or the next American president, whoever they are, might well use executive power to some extent to the degree that Donald Trump has used it, because that's been normalized. And
no question. And by the way, they will go after their political adversaries. You know, he's created a playbook where the next American president could use that very same playbook the way he's used it.
That's why I'm not sure that the next American president will be a reaction to this rather than a follow-on.
Now we're in a pendulum. But I have faith in the country. Okay, my grandparents had an unconditional love of this country. I'm from a family of coal miners and peasant farmers and day workers. But I'm sitting here at Bloomberg talking to you. Okay, that is
the American dream.
That is the dream, and that is the promise of America. And so, and by the way, I'm too short to see the glass anything other than half full. When I look at the glass, it looks full to me. Okay, so I'm going to make the bet that we're going to figure it out. The American people can smell a rotting cadaver in their basement. There's rot going on right now. They don't like the situation. They voted. Look at what's going on. They voted Biden out. They put the Republican back in. They're going from Republican to Democrat to Republican because they want to throw all the bums out. They're upset with everybody. Both parties have negative approval ratings. So imagine if we could get somebody in there that can communicate to the people and say, okay, listen, we got to go back to the processes, okay? What Cicero said 2,600 years ago, we're slaves to the law in order to be free. Look at what happened to Viktor Orban. He rigged the elections, he gamed the system, he gamed the banks, and he still lost because the people can smell a rotting cadaver. Okay, and we've got to find leadership in this country that can explain that to the people. And I think we have people in the country that would respond to that.
Do you keep reading the classics? Is that your choice of reading these days?
I read everything. Despite this Italian exoskeleton from Long Island, I'm actually just like a bookworm.
What are you reading right now?
Well, I believe it or not, on the plane over here, I reread the autobiography of Ben Franklin, because H.W. Brands has a book out called American Patriarch. This is a very famous historian from SMU. He's writing about George Washington's life this time. He's written about Franklin and Teddy Roosevelt and FDR, et cetera, Ronald Reagan. But this book, I think, is very well timed because we're heading into the 250th anniversary of the country, and Washington is still seen by many Americans as cast in marble. And I think this book is definitional of Washington in terms of what Washington actually wanted for the country. There's a lot of messages in there that could resonate for today. But one of the more unique things about Washington was the relationship with Franklin, because ultimately he needed Franklin to go to France and sort of codify that treaty and get the help of Lafayette. And so what am I reading right now? I just finished American Patriarch by H.W. Brands, and I'm rereading Ben Franklin's autobiography because I find that Franklin is really the first mover in the self-improvement market in the United States. He is the original Horatio Alger.
Does history help with the present? Like, do you see things that you can use, or is it an escape from the present?
It's a guide. I think you have to understand the history. It makes you a better investor, and it makes you a better thinker about the world.
Anthony Scaramucci, thank you.
It's such a pleasure to be with you, and congratulations on your show.